On behalf of AFP and our coalition group members, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today to work on this important issue. To speak on behalf of AFP, I would like to introduce our president, Tim Phillips.
Well, good afternoon. There are issues that come before Congress on occasion that give individual elected leaders an opportunity to show that their rhetoric is backed by their actual votes. And the Export-Import Bank is just such an issue. This is an entity that, in effect, rewards having buddies and friends in high places. And that's what it's about in most cases. In 2012, this entity signed off on $36 billion of taxpayer dollars, in effect, backed by the taxpayers. And it favors the largest corporations with the best connected lobbying outfits. And that doesn't serve economic freedom and prosperity and, frankly, fairness enough. Sometimes the left loves to use fairness, and we should take that word back sometimes. It's not fair when a company that's not as well connected doesn't have a level field on which to compete with its goods and services. But that's exactly what the Export-Import Bank does. It gives certain corporations that are well connected an unfair advantage, while also exposing taxpayers to potentially massive losses. And I know that sometimes they'll do their own accounting at the Export-Import Bank and they'll go, hey, we're actually a profit center. Well, that's a Washington, D.C. profit center. And I think most Americans know the real truth. In fact, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology did a study of an individual year and found that losses were around $200 million for this entity, in effect. So the idea that it's a profit-making venture is not accurate. And the idea that it is, in the end, exposing the federal government or the taxpayers to potential losses is accurate. And it's just the wrong way for the government to do business. And so in this case, we're asking the Congress to do something that it usually does exceedingly well, and that is absolutely nothing. Just don't do anything. Don't reauthorize this corporate cronyism entity, in effect. And for House Republicans, this is a good test for them. A lot of times we're here talking about Democrats and saying that this is a chance for them to stand up and do something they wouldn't normally do that actually will help the country. In this case, in all candor, we're talking, of course, to Democrats, but in reality, we're especially talking to House Republicans. Because again, a staple at every campaign speech back home, before every primary audience back home, a staple for House Republicans, I've heard it hundreds of times, is we're fiscally responsible. We're going to protect taxpayer dollars. We're going to genuinely respect and further and push forward economic freedom and prosperity. Well, here's an opportunity for every House Republican to back up that lofty rhetoric, and that good rhetoric, by the way. Rhetoric, that's the right thing to do. And so we're going to be watching closely in coming days at Americans for Prosperity. We're going to be holding events in some House districts to further encourage House members, and again, especially Republicans, to back their rhetoric with an actual good outcome here. And we're going to be continuing to ask our over 2 million activists to step forward and contact legislators and also their friends and neighbors about this issue as well. And someone was saying, well, this isn't the sexiest issue in the world, right? The Export-Import Bank, how do you draw? But it's an important issue. And it's one that we are going to make interesting. We're going to make sure folks back home know that this is simply a vote about whether or not to further government cronyism. And to do it with about $35 to $40 billion of taxpayer funding in reality. That goes to some of the most well-connected corporations in the country. So we're committed to this issue. We're excited to have so many partners in this effort as well. One of whom is the American Conservative Union. Larry, you guys have focused on this issue for many years, I know. And thank you for that, and I'd like to introduce Larry. Larry.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks AFP for putting this coalition together. Well, the American Conservative Union enthusiastically supports this coalition to try and stop the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. Before 2012, there was virtually no opposition to reauthorization in the Congress, and consequently, no examination of what this anachronistic New Deal era agency has become. It's become an agency that distorts the free market by helping companies the government favors those are the winners, and hurting those it does not. Those are the losers. Of course, it's never enough for the winners to just reauthorize anything. Instead, they keep raising the taxpayers' exposure. Last time around, that exposure was increased by 40% to $140 billion. Now they want the limit increased to $160 billion. Fortunately, we have a principal conservative as chairman of the House Financial Services Committee now, in Jeb Hensarling, who deserves a lot of credit for challenging the status quo. He has pointed out that the agency's own Inspector General says the bank's risk management framework and governance structure are not commensurate with its size, scope, and strategic ambitions of the institution. The response that up to now they haven't lost any money is the same refrain we heard for years from those who ran Fannie Mae into bankruptcy. We look forward to Chairman Hensarling's close examination of the bank in hearings that will raise the awareness level of this issue.
Hello everyone, my name is Maddie Doppler. I am the Director of Budget and Regulatory Policy at Americans for Tax Reform. I want to thank Americans for Prosperity for putting on this event, this important event. As Phil suggested, this is an issue that really does unite a lot of people, especially within the conservative movement, because it speaks to the problem of Washington thinking it can be the solution. The Export-Import Bank, I think, is emblematic of many things that we see that are wrong with DC today. It is an archaic and outdated institution. It dates back to the New Deal era, when the idea that perhaps the US government needed to have this kind of role in business underwriting. That, of course, is not an idea that holds water today, but since inertia is what dictates policy here in Washington rather than reason, we are still stuck with it. And of course, that leads to one of the biggest problems with the Export-Import Bank, which is it really is an institutionalized cronyism. It's a slush fund for political favors and does very little to focus on what kind of monetary policy, what kind of fiscal policy would benefit the United States economy and businesses in a globalized marketplace. This, of course, is aided by the fact that the bank is extraordinarily opaque. There is very little transparency, a concern that has been expressed by both the Government Accountability Office, the Inspector General, as well as the Congressional Research Service, who say there are no metrics in place for the bank to actually show why it's doing what it's doing, what kind of practices it enters into. There's also no accountability in terms of metrics that would look at success. We don't know what success looks like from the bank besides the metrics that the bank says are important, which is how much lending it's doing. Of course, there's no indication as to whether or not that lending is successful or prudent. Beyond that, of course, it is a hugely distorting force within marketplaces. The rationale that we need to be fighting poor practices from other countries with our own is, of course, a nonsensical one, but that is exactly why the bank exists. What the proponents of the bank would like you to believe is that if we just try to fight cronyism in other countries with our own, we can somehow win, which, of course, is a problematic idea to be governing United States fiscal policy. The United States already obviously suffers from a very uncompetitive global presence based on the fact that we have the highest corporate income tax rate in the developed world, that we tax foreign income doubly rather than allowing it to come back and be used within our shores. And all of these are issues that need to be addressed. So the termination of the Export-Import Bank is a necessary but not sufficient condition to make sure the United States is being as globally competitive as possible. And as Tim mentioned, Congress, all they have to do is nothing. Of course, there are some great champions on this issue, particularly Senator Lee and Congressman Amash, who have authored the Export-Import Bank Termination Act, which would not only get rid of the Export-Import Bank, but make sure that it doesn't come back to haunt us in the future. So we are very thankful for those congressmen who have taken leadership on this issue, and we look forward to continuing to work on this effort. Thank you. Next is Dave Williams with the Taxpayer Protection Alliance.
Good afternoon, and thank you. As Maddie mentioned, my name is David Williams. I'm with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. I'm honored to be here today with all these folks talking about the Export-Import Bank, mainly because this really is the poster child for corporate welfare and crony capitalism. We heard Maddie and Tim talk about some of the underlying reasons why the Ex-Im Bank should be eliminated. Let me just repeat a few and give you some more. Year after year, Ex-Im Bank doles out tens of billions of dollars in below-market financing to foreign companies at the expense of American jobs. By denying reauthorization of the Ex-Im Bank this year, Congress has a prime opportunity to end some of the worst practices of cronyism that we've ever seen in this government. For example, in 2012, foreign airlines based in 20 different countries received more than $11 billion in below-market financing. The Wall Street Journal estimated that this has cost American carriers as much as 7,500 jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. In one case, Delta had to cancel a route from New York to India because of the Air India undercut the prices so much using EXIM money and taxpayer money. The airline industry, and specifically Boeing, have certainly been the focus of attention by the EXIM Bank and those who want to eliminate it. But it's not just Boeing, and it's just not airline companies that are benefiting from this. Last year, Gina Reinhart, the richest person in Australia, and her iron ore mining company, Roy Hill, received approval for $694 million in financing from the EXIM Bank. Now, this is going to go to buy heavy mining equipment from the company Caterpillar. The problem here, as with other EXIM Bank dealings, is that foreign companies receiving favorable loan rates, it gives them a competitive advantage over their American counterparts. This one deal alone is estimated to displace nearly $600 million of U.S. iron ore exports and would lead to a loss of about $1.2 billion in domestic sales. Jobs are also at stake. When the free market is tossed aside to pick winners and losers in a system that favors certain companies, loss in sales and production will certainly lead to a loss of jobs. And I want to keep it short. I know we have a 2-minute maximum here, but let me just wrap up by saying, eliminating the EXIM Bank, this is what people outside the Beltway call a no-brainer. And we really hope that the time has come for both parties. This is to Republicans and Democrats. The time has come to eliminate the EXIM Bank. And as it's been said before, the easiest thing Congress can do is nothing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Josh Withrow, and I'm with the organization FreedomWorks, and I'm very happy to be joining all of these organizations here in this room today. It seems like such a no-brainer. I'd like to continue that trend here. There are very few issues in this entire city that can unite the conservative movement quite as easily as this one here, because it's absolutely astonishing that Republicans in particular would even allow this program to continue to exist when the solution to it, as people have been noting, is simply to do absolutely nothing. The EXIM Bank just celebrated its 80th anniversary in February. Seems like it's probably time to put it out to the pasture. The one thing that I basically wanted to, I'll keep my remarks really brief, the one thing I wanted to just kind of hammer in on is the fact that the entire purpose of the EXIM Bank, in and of itself, basically invalidates its need for existence. The EXIM Bank says that its loans do not compete with other loans that are out there on the market. Now, the point of that is if it's not competing with other loans out there on the market, that's the reason is if you can't get a loan from the private market, that loan should not be made because it's too risky, because banks who actually have an incentive to control what their money is going out, what their risks are, will regulate themselves. So if the loans are not competing with the market, then they shouldn't be existing in the first place. So there's 3 basic points. 1, it distorts the market by making loans that shouldn't be existing on their own. 2, it picks winners and losers by sending the overwhelming majority of its money to a small number of very large corporations. And 3, it puts taxpayers' money at risk. And for people who doubt this, the EXIM Bank has been bailed out once before. I know other people here will be talking about that. So Congressman Justin Amash, Senator Mike Lee, they have a great bill out there that would not only wind down the EXIM Bank, but would actually permanently prevent this from ever happening again. But at the end of the day, all Congress has to do is nothing, and I think that's exactly what they ought to do.
Good afternoon. I'm Nan Swift, Federal Affairs Manager at the National Taxpayers Union, and thanks to Chrissy at AFP for organizing all this. We're really glad to be here. We've opposed the EXIM Bank for a long time now. Proponents of the Export-Import Bank like to claim that the government needs to provide cheap taxpayer-backed credit in order to level the playing field, despite the fact that in almost any case where the government intervenes to do so, has resulted in a series of unintended consequences in an even less level playing field. Indeed, anytime legislators claim the need to level the playing field, you can be sure that big government is actually putting a big thumb on the scale. Whether it's in favor of corn ethanol via the damaging renewable fuel standard, going after traditional energy sources via heavy-handed regulations, or in the case of the Export-Import Bank, on behalf of well-connected special interests at the expense of taxpayers and less fortunate industries. Taxpayers should question whether gigantic companies like Caterpillar, which just last week marked higher earnings for yet another quarter, need Washington to level the playing field, or Ford, John Deere, or GE. Do these global brands really need a leg up bringing their products to new markets? Or is it more likely that they get big bucks from the bank because XM supporters like the Chamber of Commerce and National Association of Manufacturers have board members that happen to sit on the board of these major companies? A timely illustration of the unequal playing field perpetuated by XM Bank is the current debate over liquefied natural gas. Even as U.S. natural gas exports are restricted to just a handful of companies with which the U.S. has a free trade agreement, the XM Bank has provided billions of dollars in support of LNG projects in other countries such as Papua New Guinea, Australia, and the Philippines. Robust competition and free trade dictate that competitors to U.S. natural gas will and should develop their own energy resources. But the federal government shouldn't be propping up direct competitors for U.S. products using taxpayer-backed credit. Not when our own producers are not allowed to compete on that level playing field. This is doubly true when the recipients of XM Bank largesse are giant corporations more than capable of securing their own private capital. Despite a past bailout, a lack of transparent accounting, and even a stress test that produced no results, the crony capitalism of XM Bank has been allowed to continue unabated, exposing taxpayers to considerable risk and distorting markets. For this reason, NTU has been joined in the past by our allies at US PIRG to advocate for the elimination of the XM Bank. While NTU and US PIRG disagree on a lot, including the appropriate size and scope of the federal government, we are united in our belief that the bank is an anachronistic corporate welfare program that should be eliminated. And next we have Tom Schatz, president of the Citizens Against Government Waste.
Thank you, Nan. Thank you, Tim and Chrissy, and everyone at Americans for Prosperity. I really appreciate them putting this together. Many of us have been working on this for a long time, and it's nice to see such a large group coming together on this issue. I'm going to start out by saying something shocking. I agree with Barack Obama, who in 2008 as a presidential candidate said that the Export-Import Bank is little more than a fund for corporate welfare. We've been working on corporate welfare issues for many, many years. There have been coalitions attempted, not always successfully, bipartisan basis here in Congress. This is one example that really should be embraced by anyone who wants to go back and tell their constituents that they really have done something to cut wasteful spending. There's always a lot of talk about voting for or against certain issues. This is one that would be very easy to stand up as either a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican and say, we all agree the Export-Import Bank should come to an end. There is plenty of other financing available for these companies. These are international competitors, very large companies. It's one of the worst examples of corporate welfare that we've ever seen, and it's nice to see everyone pulling together to get rid of it. The elimination of the Export-Import Bank has been a recommendation of CAGW's prime cuts for many years. The Grace Commission in 1984, after which CAGW was formed to carry out those recommendations, made proposals to reform the XM Bank. We have since concluded that's just not going to work. It's just time to get rid of it altogether. And so we've been out there for 20 plus years fighting to get rid of the Export-Import Bank. We're glad that everybody is now on board, pushing this forward. We know that people outside of Washington understand this. They understood Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac very well and banded together to push for those reforms. And this is time for everyone to band together and get rid of the Export-Import Bank. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dan Holler with Heritage Action. Most of you probably saw the USA Today Pew poll this morning that says Republicans are poised for their best election in 20-some years. The question is, what are they going to do with that advantage that they now have? We think that there's a real opportunity for the Republican Party to rebrand itself. All too often, the Republican Party is, in some cases this is very fair, tagged as being the party of corporate welfare and big business. This is an opportunity to flip that on its head. be able to go to constituents, be able to go to people in the press and say, look, it's not the Republican Party, it's not conservatives that are in the pocket for big business, it's Barack Obama and the Democrats. Think about an election cycle where Republicans can credibly, and that's the key, credibly, right? It's not just the rhetoric, credibly claim that they are in Washington fighting against corporate welfare. That's a game changer for a lot of voters. Because what you see with voters right now is they're frustrated as heck with Washington. They don't like Republicans, they don't like Democrats. They're looking for somebody who was going to go to Washington and represent them. This is a chance to say, look, I know we messed up in the past, but believe me when I say that we've changed. This is the opportunity for the Republican Party to do just that. So I submit that we should take this opportunity. We don't actually have to do anything, as everybody's pointed out. We can let the bank expire. That happens on September 30th. Republicans can and should see this opportunity throughout the midterms. It's a great policy. The politics will follow. And if they do that, we can set a course where it's not just the Export-Import Bank, but it is a whole long list of all the things that we've been fighting against for years, and in some cases decades, that we're in a good position to authentically oppose and get credit from voters. So let's end the Export-Import Bank, and we can do it this year.
I'm Luke Kenworthy with Generation Opportunity, Gen Op, and we're happy to be able to be a part of this opposition to the EXIM Import Bank because we believe the EXIM Import Bank is a classic example of the type of cronyism that has left my generation with less opportunity than the past. This boondoggle not only adds to the national debt, which we'll have to pay for, but it also sends a signal that in order to get ahead, you have to get connected. We believe that there's a war on youth and that the deck is stacked against us. But at Gen Op, we're fighting for millennials. We're fighting against these matters that threaten our economic freedom. And despite the fact that we have unemployment above 15%, with $1 trillion in student loan debt, we're starting more businesses and startups than ever before. And that's because we're the most creative, entrepreneurial, tech-savvy generation America has to offer. And stuff like this threatens our future. So Congress has an opportunity. They can either reauthorize the EXIM Bank and let everyone know the status quo will prevail, or they can stand up for millennials. They can stand up for the future of our generation and make certain that the EXIM Bank is a thing of the past. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Moylan. I'm Executive Director of the R Street Institute. R Street is a free market think tank, relatively new, based here in Washington, D.C. And I'll make my remarks relatively brief, and they include two principles that govern many of my interactions with my 5-year-old daughter. The first one is don't do dumb things, and the second one is don't whine. On the first principle, don't do dumb things, the Export-Import Bank is an obvious example of a dumb thing. It is the equivalent of a child sticking a fork into an electrical socket. And now that my daughter's 5 years old, she knows better than that. So those are the sorts of things that we expect her to be able to figure out. These are the sorts of policy issues that we expect a Congress full of some awfully smart people to be able to figure out. When you have 90% of the subsidies going to large multinational corporations, when you're talking about costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars per year, that seems like a no-brainer. That's a layup. And on the second one, don't whine. There's an interesting angle to this. One of the arguments that you often hear in support of the Export-Import Bank is that we have all these foreign countries that are doing all this work to subsidize their own exports, and that we have to respond in kind by doing the same. And my response to that is that we should respond to foreign subsidies of their own exports with a thank you note, not with dumb subsidies of our own. There is a broad consensus on this issue on the right, as you're seeing today, and also on the left, as Nan and others will mention. And this should be among the easiest things that Congress can do. That's why we're all here today, and hopefully that's a message that resonates. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. I'm Jorge Lima, the Policy Director at the Libre Initiative, and we're proud to stand here along with our coalition members to oppose the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. I too recognize that I'm at the end of this line, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks short. Whatever good intentions may have existed when the EXIM Bank first started, the reality is that today it's just another example of government cronyism. Far too often are the funds landing into the pockets of large corporations that do not need that help and at a cost to small businesses and American jobs. We feel that the President and members of Congress should be committed to eliminating this waste and should be using taxpayer dollars for the common good rather than choosing winners and losers. Hispanics, like fellow Americans throughout the country, want a smaller, more limited government, and it is exactly in areas like this where we see the government distorting markets and making it more difficult for new entrants that it reigns more true. Hispanics create businesses at 3 times the national rate, and Congress should be focusing in making sure that those new entrants, whether it's in this industries or others, are playing on a level playing field as opposed to facing more barriers. We call on Congress to take this opportunity to cut this waste and allow the authorization of the Export-Import Bank to expire. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Chrissy Hansen with Americans for Prosperity. I'd like to thank all of our coalition partners for coming and joining us in this opposition to reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank.